We're going to live here as a family, so outsiders need to leave. My mother-in-law slowly and carefully explained this to make sure I understood. Nelda's face turned red while she put her hand over her mouth. Unable to hold back, Nelda burst into laughter, which triggered my mother-in-law to laugh out loud as well. Right after my father passed away, my in-laws seemed to have been lying in wait, and they showed up trying to take over our high-rise apartment. Surrounded by their laughter, I just bowed my head. My shoulders were shaking. Perhaps feeling pity for me, Brad spoke words of comfort. Don't be so down. I let you be by your father's side, so you should have no regrets. Now it's my turn to do the same. Why don't you go visit Helen? Though, I'm not sure if she will be okay with it. I shook my shoulders, holding back my tears. But I couldn't bear it anymore. Suddenly, I lifted my face and started laughing loudly. Ahahaha. I wiped the tears from the corner of my eyes. Do as you please. I've already contacted the lawyer. It's arrogant to emphasize that I did my filial duty. Thinking that they were enjoying themselves behind our backs, deceiving me and my father, anger welled up within me. I was determined to spoil their plans of joy following my father's death. I am Michelle White, 53 years old. My only daughter, Helen, graduated from university this year and started working. I thought I'd be more at ease after finishing raising her, but I'm still worried about Helen, who lives alone in the city. It has been 6 months since she started her job, but she hasn't come home even once. I wonder if Helen is eating properly, I blurted out during dinner with my husband. Tonight's menu was meat and potatoes, Helen's favorite. Eating that, I couldn't help but think of her face. She just started her job, so I know she's busy, but that's exactly why I want to make nutritious meals for her. Brad was right in front of me, but he didn't even glance my way. He clutched his smartphone in his left hand, staring at it while eating. He wasn't focused on the meal, spilling the broth on the table and making unpleasant chewing noises. Brad, are you listening? Brad gave no response. It seemed like my voice never reached his ears, and the concerns I had once again felt like mere monologues, shutting my anxious feelings in. When was the last time Brad and I had a proper conversation? I never thought we would become a couple so lacking in communication when we got married. I met Brad 23 years ago. A friend introduced him to me just before I turned 30. Brad was well educated and worked for a major company, which made me nervous, but I was immediately taken by his kind, confident smile. It seemed he liked me too, and we started dating. He always planned dates at sophisticated cafes and romantic spots featured in fashion magazines, escorting me each time. I've been really focused on my work and didn't have much luck with women, but meeting you felt as if it were predestined. I can tell you are the one for me. His handsome features made even the sweetest words seem fitting. He was like a prince who openly expressed his love. But I was not a princess. I was just an ordinary office worker. I was anxious about whether I was good enough for someone so elite. While I was having such worries, Brad unexpectedly proposed to me. While it should have been a joyful moment, the fact that we had only known each other for 2 months made me anxious, and I couldn't say yes. When I shared my concerns, he gently embraced me and whispered in my ear, "Marriage doesn't need extra emotions. To me, you are the best." So we got married, and I felt like the happiest woman in the world. That was until the day after our wedding when our new married life began. "Michelle, are you really going to feed me this?" Brad said coldly as he looked at me, setting the breakfast on the table. His face was very cold, and he clearly seemed in a bad mood, though I couldn't understand why. It was our first day living together, so I had put extra effort into the cooking. I prepared a lavish breakfast, including an omelet with crispy bacon, yogurt parfait with berries and oats, and freshly baked scones right from the oven. I just need coffee and bread in the morning. It's hard to read the newspaper with anything else. Ah, I see. You're the type who doesn't think about efficiency and enjoys a leisurely, inefficient meal in the morning. How that figures. Brad's attitude had changed completely since yesterday. I was so surprised by his words that I was left speechless. He stared at my shocked face. "That foolish look on your face, I like it," he said with a grin. However, he left the house without touching the breakfast. Left alone with the untouched meal, I had no choice but to stand there. I had planned to take the day off work to tidy up the house, but I was so shocked by his words that I couldn't move, neither physically nor emotionally. Around 9 a.m., the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, my mother and sister-in-law Nelda entered the room without a greeting. Michelle, it seems you tried to impress Brad with your cooking this morning, but that was futile. Brad is not a simple man who can be manipulated with food," my mother-in-law continued without pausing for breath. Brad always eats bread at home and goes to work as usual. It's unfortunate for him, especially so early in the marriage. Nelda grimaced as if enjoying the situation. It seemed Brad had stopped by his parents' house before going to work this morning. A minor misunderstanding between us had been exposed to his family, and I felt embarrassed. Nelda looked around the room and sighed dramatically. Mom, look, there are still moving boxes in the corner of the room. Michelle is really sloppy, isn't she? Oh, I was just about to clean those up, I replied desperately, but my mother-in-law immediately dismissed it. No excuses. Look, you're just an ordinary office worker who is all talk and no action. You're not a good match for Brad, not at all. You should be grateful that he accepted someone like you. My mother-in-law sat down. Now, make some tea. You should at least be able to serve tea without being told, she hurried me. I quickly made the tea and offered it to them. After taking a sip, my mother-in-law snorted with laughter. This is terrible. The tea is too weak. For someone who works as an office worker serving tea, this is quite poor. Both my mother-in-law and Nelda slurped their scalding tea noisily. I wonder if Brad is truly satisfied with such a girl. Well, maybe that's just what you get from a daughter-in-law. Brad does like you, Michelle. Despite their insinuating comments, I couldn't find the courage to speak up in front of my husband's family. Nelda lived at home. She was single and surrounded herself with idle merchandise. She wasn't even a regular office worker like me, and she even recently quit her part-time job at a supermarket. Despite being hurt by her remarks, I had no room to argue. I had hoped for a sweet newlywed life, but my husband scorned me, and my mother-in-law and Nelda often made snide remarks. This was not the life I had hoped for. I couldn't consider divorce right after getting married. Half a year later, while I was troubled, I became pregnant and eventually gave birth to Helen. The blatant nastiness from my in-laws decreased. It wasn't because they were too cruel to berate a mother in front of a young child. Rather, it was because Nelda became obsessed with the popular Korean wave. My mother-in-law also became busy with watching TV dramas from morning to night and going on pilgrimages to drama sites together. As a result, they showed less interest in me and my daughter. It's sad that Helen didn't feel her grandmother's love, but maintaining a proper distance had somehow kept our household calm. Brad seemed satisfied as long as I fully understood and supported his pace of life. Time flew by, and before I knew it, we'd been married for 23 years. While it can't be said that I am extremely happy, we have been living a stable and troubled life. I thought time would just quietly continue to pass. However, Brad surprisingly suggested something new. How about we live together now? I was so surprised that I dropped my spoon. Brad's voice, which I hadn't heard in a while, seemed almost like a hallucination. What? I gasped, feeling the blood drain from my face. I thought he meant living with my mother-in-law, but I was mistaken. Isn't your father going to rebuild his house? I thought, why not live together then? I had mentioned my father's house situation to Brad a few days ago but didn't get any reaction at that time. However, it seemed he had been listening after all. It's ridiculous that he wants to rebuild his house in his 80s, even if the house is aging. Well, that's probably just an excuse. He surely wants to bring you closer by building a new house. Your mother passed away a few years ago and your father is getting old. Living alone must be tough. While confused by the unexpected suggestion, I desperately tried to understand. But you know, I'd prefer to live in an apartment, not a detached house. It's us who are going to be living there long-term, not your father, so I hope this bit of selfishness can be excused in exchange for living together. Without mocking my stunned silence, Brad continued in a gentle tone. Also, I'm worried about you, Michelle. You worry too much about Helen. Now that you're finally free from childcare, it's time to start the second phase of your life. Changing environments will help refresh your mood. Thank you, Brad. Although he might seem aloof, he had been considering my feelings. Tears welled up in my eyes. I immediately talked to my father about moving in together, and he was very happy and couldn't thank Brad enough. Once the decision was made, Brad acted quickly, as if he had been eyeing it from the start, and contracted a new high-rise apartment. Even though Brad works at a major company, going for a high-rise apartment was surprising. I only receive a monthly allowance for living expenses and am not familiar with our savings, but when I checked the market price of the apartment, my head started to spin. Now that Helen is independent, I don't feel like living in a family-type apartment anymore. I want to start the second phase of my life. Since it's going to be our last home, I think it's okay to indulge a little. It seemed my father had already agreed and plans had been moving forward without my knowledge. Although I felt a bit anxious, living in the high-rise apartment was actually very comfortable. This beautiful new home was supposed to be the start of a fulfilling second phase of my life. However, my relationship with Brad gradually deteriorated. There was some conversation until the purchase of the new home, but afterwards, the previous silence returned. Additionally, his overtime and business trips increased, and he barely came home. May Brad can't relax at home because my father is there? My father looked sad and seemed to have lost his energy, confining himself to the small space. Dad, do you no longer go to your ballroom dancing classes or do karaoke? It seems you haven't gone since we moved. I've decided to quit. Why? Well, it's fine. I get to spend time with you. That's enough for me. My father lost his hobbies and he seemed to have aged rapidly. Even when I encouraged him to go out, he oddly only went for walks late at night. Then, just a year after we started living together, my father was rushed to the hospital due to an illness. While preparing for his hospitalization, I found a passbook hidden among his clothes when I opened his drawer. It felt wrong to go through my father's personal items, but something felt off. When I opened the passbook, a surprising truth was revealed. Dad, what is this all about? I rushed to the hospital and confronted my father directly. However, he just smiled. Spending time with Michelle was the greatest happiness for me. I'm grateful to Brad for that. But actually, there's something about him. My father's words shocked me, and I couldn't hide my disturbance. Quietly, my father took my hand in his. And a few days later, my father passed away quietly. When I contacted Brad, he responded with a bright tone. Oh, that was quicker than I thought. Afterwards, a disaster that seemed to cut through my grief struck. As I was looking for a photo for the memorial service at home, the front door opened. I thought it was Brad returning, but I heard several footsteps. Can we put these boxes here? The newcomers were movers, carrying cardboard boxes. Behind them appeared my mother-in-law. Oh, Michelle, you're here too? Nelda and Brad were with her. As box after box was brought in, I asked in astonishment, what are these boxes for? Can't you see? A tea-serving office lady seems to lack insight. Nelda and I are moving in. My mother-in-law answered nonchalantly. She and Nelda exchanged glances and laughed together. Nelda added pointedly, we express our condolences. Yes, our condolences. Now, could you please leave? As I stood bewildered, Brad, who had been silent, suddenly laughed. Michelle doesn't get it, explain it to her in simpler terms. Then, my mother-in-law began to explain slowly. We're going to live here as a family, so outsiders need to leave. She slowly and carefully explained this to make sure I understood. Nelda's face turned red while she put her hand over her mouth. Unable to hold back, Nelda burst into laughter, which triggered my mother-in-law to laugh out loud as well. Now that the troublesome old man is gone, this house belongs to us. Their laughter echoed through the home that had once promised a new chapter in my life, now turning into a scene of betrayal and loss. Surrounded by the laughter of my mother-in-law and her company, I bowed my head as my shoulders were shaking. Perhaps feeling pity for me, Brad offered some words of comfort. Don't be so down. I let you be by your father's side, so you should have no regrets. Now it's my turn to do the same. Why don't you go visit Helen? Though, I'm not sure if she will be okay with it. I was shaking, holding back tears, but I couldn't bear it anymore. Suddenly, I lifted my face and started laughing loudly, ahahaha. I wiped the tears from the corners of my eyes. Please do as you like. I've already contacted a lawyer. Brad and the others twisted their faces in surprise. Has she gone mad? How creepy. Ignoring their reactions, I left the house. Their presumption of doing me a favor by allowing me to fulfill my filial duties was offensive. Thinking that they had been enjoying themselves behind our backs, deceiving both me and my father, anger welled up within me. I was determined to spoil their plans of joy following my father's death. For the time being, I put them aside and made sure my father's funeral went smoothly without any disturbances. Of course, none of Brad's family attended. After successfully sending off my father, my revenge began. I did not return home but stayed in a business hotel. Then, on the following Sunday, I went back to the high-rise apartment, my resolve firm. Using the keys I had, I unlocked the entrance and led many relatives into the apartment. Nelda, dressed in casual home clothes, let out a shriek of surprise. Yikes, was her ugly cry. Brad and my mother-in-law frowned in astonishment. The relatives I brought with me quickly began packing items from the room into boxes. I'm here to organize some belongings, I announced as I entered. Initially, my mother-in-law responded with a nod, but her demeanor quickly changed, snapping, "Why suddenly? This is absurd. It's absurd? But you and Nelda moved in here suddenly without a word to me, didn't you?" I retorted. While my mother-in-law and Nelda were both angered and shaken, Brad quickly caught on. "Hey, don't touch our things," he shouted at the relatives who had begun to pack not just my personal items but also the furniture and appliances. Temporarily confused, my relatives halted their packing, but I urged them to continue. "Don't worry, these are my belongings, please take them to the new house. And their stuff to the storage unit," I directed them. My relatives nodded and continued to pack everything in the room. "What are you doing without permission?" Brad exclaimed. "Without permission? Isn't that exactly what you did?" I snapped back. As my relatives moved back and forth, a man in a suit appeared. "This gentleman is here from a real estate agency to appraise the property today." I introduced him. "Appraisal?" Brad reacted in shock, too bewildered even to accept the business card offered to him. "Yes, can't you see? Think about it a little, Brad. I'm planning to put this apartment on the market." Brad, my mother-in-law, and Nelda were all wide-eyed with surprise. Unable to hold back, I laughed aloud at their dumbfounded expressions. "Why are you surprised? This house was purchased by my father and you all have no right to live here." Meanwhile, my mother-in-law, in a panic, insisted, "What do you mean? Wasn't it just that Michelle's father helped with the down payment?" Pressing Brad for answers. It seemed she was under the misconception that my father had only contributed a small amount of money. Brad remained silent. As the room quieted down, I explained the situation. I truly appreciated Brad suggesting that we live with my father, but it turns out he was just after my father's assets. In reality, Brad had persuaded my father to buy the apartment without my knowledge, and that was the hidden condition of our cohabitation. My father had exhausted his savings to purchase the apartment. What's the problem? It's smarter for us to buy the apartment than for an elderly person to rebuild a house unnecessarily. It's a wise investment. In the end, Michelle did her filial duty, so no complaints are needed. Indeed. I am thankful for the time I spent with my father. See, Brad's confidence was revolting. Remembering my father's bank account pained me. Initially, it was emptied for the apartment purchase, and thereafter, as soon as the pension came in, it was immediately withdrawn. My father's decreased enjoyment of his hobbies was because he no longer had the financial freedom. Not only the savings, but you were also withdrawing the pension as living expenses. How greedy can you get? Unable to bear my direct gaze, Brad looked away. However, now I'm glad that my father bought this place. As his only daughter, I inherit this home and can put it on the market right away. It would have been troublesome if you had contributed even $10,000 to make it a joint ownership. So, what was that about outsiders should leave? Don't make me laugh. You're the ones who need to leave this house. To cover Brad's embarrassed face, my mother-in-law stepped forward. Yes, sorry. It was really wrong of us. My son has caused trouble. Is that enough? We're sorry for using your beloved father-in-law's money. But he's passed away. Why blame Brad for something a deceased person was involved in? Michelle, you really are persistent. My mother-in-law had completely shifted gears, realizing the direness of the situation while Nelda approached me. Who said you are an outsider? Stop this ridiculous joke. We are family. We came because we thought you'd be lonely after your father-in-law's death. Why don't we live together nicely? The audacity of them acting like family after trying to drive me out was beyond infuriating. I don't even feel angry anymore. Brad, what do you think? Am I an outsider? Are you thinking of divorce? Brad answered in almost an inaudible voice. No, I'm not planning to divorce. I love only you, Michelle, so please don't say anything about selling the house. The Brad who had once looked down on me was no longer there. Seeing Brad hang his head in shame, I couldn't understand why I had ever been accommodating to him. You love me? That's clearly a lie. After all, you're just after the house I inherited, I said provocatively. No, I truly love you, Brad retorted. Stop it, you're making me sick. How dare you say those words after having an affair? That's shameless. At that moment, I confronted him with several photos. They were pictures of Brad entering a hotel with another woman, looking in to mate. Brad had no room for denial. What is this? He stammered. These are pictures I got from Dad, I informed him. From that old fool. Brad hadn't been coming home and was just demanding money. Dad was suspicious all along. I was shocked because I hadn't doubted you. When you spend a lot of time with someone, you don't notice the abnormalities. I don't know how long you've been cheating, but I feel like all the time I spent with you was wasted. It really hurts. My father, unfamiliar with using his mobile phone's camera, had taken several photos of Brad's infidelity. He had debated whether to tell me, but had collected evidence during his supposed night walks. Just before he died, he told me about the infidelity along with the financial issues. Let's get a divorce, I initiated. But Michelle, Brad tried to interject, but I cut him off. Do you think you have a choice? Brad clenched his teeth. My mother-in-law clung to Brad's arm, whispering accusations. This isn't what we planned. We thought Michelle was just a simple office lady that we could easily manipulate. Confirming that I was chosen as a marital partner as merely a housekeeper and understanding why Brad's attitude cooled after the marriage. It turned out that the father of the so-called housekeeper was financially well off, seen as useful, and exploited similarly. An office lady should be obedient. Why are you resisting? You used to be so quiet, and now you've become clever as you've gotten older. This is marital fraud. Brad was deceived. My mother-in-law cried as she clung to Brad. It pained me to corner a crying mother-in-law, but I couldn't remain silent any longer. You keep mocking me as just an office lady, but isn't that all in the past? Dragging decades-old issues into the modern days with such outdated views is extremely backward. It's like you're declaring yourself outdated. Don't you find that embarrassing? My mother-in-law was visibly angry. How dare you, a mere daughter-in-law, speak like that? She retorted. The atmosphere was tense, the reality of our fractured relationships starkly apparent. The house, once a symbol of familial unity and potential prosperity, had become an arena of betrayal and exposed secrets, underscoring the vast gulf of misunderstanding and manipulation that had underpinned what I once believed was a loving relationship. Brad, with tears in his eyes, raised his voice in defiance. Yeah, you couldn't live without me. He trembled like a small dog trying to stand its ground. Brad, you know I worked too. Maybe my salary wasn't enough for the high rent or for Helen's education expenses. But tears spilled from Brad's eyes, yet I continued. I can earn enough to cover my own living expenses. It was tough to balance raising a kid and work, but I'm really glad I kept going. Thank you for everything, Brad. Goodbye. My mother-in-law glared at me with fury, but as Nelda tried to intervene, my mother-in-law ignored her and screamed her true feelings. A daughter-in-law doesn't need judgment or money. Being stupid is enough. Her voice echoed in the now empty room, stripped of furniture. Nelda collapsed to the floor. Brad looked up to the heavens. The subsequent disputes were intense, but eventually, the house was sold and the divorce from Brad was finalized. When I filed for division of assets due to his infidelity, Brad quietly agreed. Help me, I almost have no savings. While he had been wasting money, it turned out that his salary was much less than expected. Despite working at a large company with a high education, he had not advanced to a useful position even after turning 50, was not entrusted with significant tasks, and hardly did any overtime. As a result, his take-home pay was nearly the same as a new employee. Of course, his claims of being away on business or working overtime were lies. He was actually having an affair. That's why he broke down whenever we talked about money. What exactly had Brad been doing at his job? The thought that he might have been doing nothing more than making copies and serving tea was almost laughable. I made sure to receive a substantial amount in division of assets from Brad without mercy. Just when everything seemed settled and I felt relieved, only 3 months after the divorce, Brad reached out to me, suggesting we get back together, which made me shiver. Michelle, won't you start over with me from the beginning? Previously, Brad had been proud of his job, but after our divorce, he moved into a cheap 2-room apartment with his mother and Nelda. The reality of his situation and his attempt at reconciliation felt both pitiful and infuriating. My journey had brought me too far to consider turning back to a man who had revealed himself so thoroughly. Brad's unexpectedly low salary shocked his mother, who had been counting on his high income. After several loud arguments in their thin-walled apartment, Brad left his mother and Nelda behind. Feeling mismatched with his company's expectations, he resigned from his job, despite deciding to start a new life with his affair partner. Once his financial instability became apparent, he was abandoned and eventually returned to me. Seeing Brad completely misunderstand his own situation was disheartening. When I demanded property division from his affair partner, she was furious, accusing Brad of being with her for money, yet there was never any future in their relationship. I cannot possibly get back together with you. I firmly refused him. Brad left, deeply hurt, but the problems didn't stop there. We have no money. Please, can you help us? Or at least lend us some? Brad's mother and Nelda pleaded with me. It seemed Brad had returned to his mother's side. Despite claiming to be an elite, he spent his nights living lavishly in the city, quickly accumulating debt which he seemed to ignore. With no choice left, his mother and Nelda began working part-time jobs, though it seemed to have little effect. I don't have money to lend to others, I told them. In a normal family, I might have considered helping them in times of trouble, but they had unmistakably treated me as an outsider. I had spent too long playing the role of the good daughter-in-law. Since the divorce, I've relished a life without obligations to anyone. Moreover, my small apartment, where I now live alone, isn't lonely because Helen frequently visits. It's a stark contrast to a home with a grandiose father and a somber mother. Mom, you've really changed, Helen noted. Yes, perhaps Grandpa protected me in his way, giving me the courage to change, I said as I handed her freshly made meat and potatoes, her eyes lighting up with joy. I'm so happy. I love your meat and potatoes. Helen savored a bite, her eyes narrowing in contentment. This new chapter of my life, free from the shadows of manipulation and deceit, filled me with a profound sense of peace and autonomy. The sense of happiness that comes from being cherished by someone fills my heart, even giving me a sense of purpose in life. I am inspired to continue transforming myself, hoping to become strong enough to protect my daughter. Don't worry, the taste of the meat and potatoes hasn't changed, I assured her. Helen tilted her head, puzzled, but seemed relieved. I hope for these peaceful moments to last forever, a sanctuary of love and tranquility where we can both thrive, free from the tumult of the past.